Good evening. I'm Charis Current. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Donald Blake Center and Peterson Memorial Library at Walla Walla University. This project is supported with an ARPA funding provided by the Federal Institute of the Museum and Library Services, administered by the Library Services and Technology Act, through the Washington State Library, a division of the Office of the Secretary of State. The grant totaled $10,000, of which more than $7,000 has been allotted for library resources to purchase books that will ensure that students see themselves reflected in the collection and have adequate resources to support research on diverse individuals and communities. We're here to talk to Margarita Longoria about her books, Living Beyond Borders and Más Allá de la Frontera. These books are mixed media collections of short stories, personal essays, poetry, and comics that are a hopeful love letter from Mexican-American community to young readers. I want to tell you a bit about Margarita Longoria. She's a lifelong bookworm, a book blogger, a young adult book expert, and an award-winning high school librarian from South Texas. She's the founder of Border Book Bash, celebrating teens and tweens of the Rio Grande Valley, and serves as a state reading committee for the Texas Library Association. She holds a BA and MA in English and an MLS in library science. She's passionate about diverse books, her two sons, coffee, and Mr. Darcy. She grew up in Edinburgh, Texas, and lives with her family in the Rio Grande Valley. You can visit Margie online at her website, margiesmustreads.com, and also get her reviews of books, and follow her on Instagram at margiesmustreads. I now want to turn things over to Margie, and I'm going to start with the first question. And just to let you know format, we're going to do a Q&A here. I'm going to ask Margie a question, and she's going to talk. And then after she's done, we're going to go into Q&A, in which I'll call on you. So if you have a question for her, go ahead and raise your virtual hand, and I'll tell you when it's your turn to go, and you can ask her directly. So I'll start with the first question. And my question is, so what's the origin story for your books? How did they come to be?
Okay, this book, I guess, has been growing in my heart for many, many years. But what finally I used to be an English teacher. So I remember when I taught 8th grade English, there wasn't a lot of Mexican-American literature for my kids. And although we read everything in my class, we read The Outsiders and we read Twilight and Harry Potter, The Giver. I mean, we read everything, but there was, every once in a while, I was able to pull like a short story, like a Sandra Cisneros short story or a David Rice short story. There was short stories, but there wasn't a lot of novels. And so when I was able to pull these short stories, my students loved them. Like they loved to see themselves in like literature, you know. So there was also, around the time I was working, Dr. Dennis Saldana, he had a book out called The Jumping Tree. And the book was it was published by Random House. It was set here in the area that I live in, Mission, Texas. And so my students loved that book. And I remember reading a novel in the 8th grade when it's a testing subject. It was kind of difficult to try to get a whole novel and everything. I managed to do it because I think you can teach so much through a book. You can teach all the literary elements. You can teach anything through a book. Some people just don't get that, but you know, it doesn't always have to be short stories. But a lot of times in the school setting, they want it to be short stories because they feel like I don't know, maybe you're wasting time or something. So my kids loved that book. So I remember, so fast forward to about 2018, this book, the idea of this book came because of the way Mexican Americans were being portrayed in the media, the way we've always been portrayed in the media, really, but it was just a little bit more amplified at this time. We were being called rapists and that Mexicans were bad people and that Mexico only sends bad people and just all this ugly stuff about our culture and our people. And I was very upset and I was fighting with everybody on Facebook. And I thought to myself, like, why am I fighting with people on Facebook? And so I was like, I wanted to do something that was gonna, gonna make a difference somehow. And I thought to myself, well, what can I do? And I'm just a little librarian from a little border town in Texas. And I thought to myself, I want to do an anthology of short stories that diverse voices, diverse Mexican voices from like all different ages, all different parts of the United States. Because a lot of times people think that Mexicans only live in the Texas border or along the Texas, and no, we're all over the United States. So I wanted that represented in the book. And I just wanted a book for our young people, for us, for the young person in me that didn't have this growing up, for as mirrors and windows into our community and into our culture, so people can understand that we're not all these ugly things that we were being portrayed at the time. So I asked one of my really good friends, her name was Guadalupe Garcia McCall. She's an award-winning Mexican-American writer, and she's an angel, really. She's one of the best people I've ever met. And I met her about 10 years ago when my first couple of years as a librarian, and she came to my school to speak to my kids, and we just became very good friends. So I told her about this idea, and she was like, I love it. Let's do it. Go ask everybody we know. So I started emailing like everybody that I had met as a librarian throughout my years that was a Mexican American. And some people said yes, some people said no. And I kind of like, I didn't know how I was going to do it. In my head, I was going to, publish. I was going to like do like copies on the copy machine and pass it out to all the teachers. Because mainly I wanted it for English teachers. It was so important for me because I remember as an English teacher trying to find stories. And it was just, so I was like, I'm going to do it for the classroom. And that was my main goal. And Lupita just happened to be with her agent one December. It was December 2018. And she told her, they were talking about her projects. And she told her agent that she was going to do this. And so her agent wanted to talk to me. So I talked to the agent and she was like, let me represent you. I think I can sell this book. And I was kind of like, I don't even know what that means. So I just, I really was kind of, I don't know. And so Lupita was like, Margie, let's sign and let's do this. Like, this is a wonderful idea. Let's do this. So I signed. And whenever you tell people you have an agent, they're a little bit more like, okay, then I'll talk, we can work things out. So I was able to get a really beautiful cast of people to contribute to this anthology. And that's how it all started out. It happened so fast, and it doesn't happen like that for everyone. So I feel sometimes I'm like, it just happened like from boom, 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 before like all the stars aligned. I had an agent, I had, a book deal, I had an editor, I had, and I had all these people that were that contributed to this book, and we were able to put it together. And it was very much a work of art. It was a passion project, and I'm very, very proud of how it turned out.
Totally, as you should be. I mean, I think it's a real testament to both the need for this kind of book and also the capacity that exists amongst Mexican American authors, right? That the contents are so nuanced and character rich, and that you get a real sense of place and people just from really short pieces of work, whether it's a cartoon or a short story or a poem. And so, yeah, good job editing.
Thank you. It was great. It was, we had a couple. This was all sold and celebrated pre-pandemic. We sold November 2019, and then the manuscript was due. The manuscript was due in October 2020, and I was kind of like, yeah, okay. So we thought we had all, everything was hunky dory in the world, and then COVID, and then people start dying. Like my cousin passed away July 2020 because she was a nurse. She wasn't only my cousin, she was like my sister. We were 6 months apart. We grew up together. So that hit me hard. My agent's father died. My editor's father died. I had several writers. Lupita's father passed away from COVID. I had several writers whose parents or somebody passed away. And it was like to try to be creative at a time when everybody was celebrating. And then we all kind of went into this weird little, like a depression kind of. And I remember feeling like if we can't get this done, then I guess we can't get this done, because I felt I couldn't like pressure people to work during this terrible, weird time of our history and of our lives. But everybody was really wonderful and very professional and turned in their work, and we edit, I would edit, send it back. Everybody worked with me. We talked about the stories. It was also kind of a way for us to get through the crazy pandemic, and we met our deadline in October barely, and we were able to get it out. But it was very much, like I said, a passion project. Everybody who was involved really wanted this to work and really wanted it out, and into the world.
Completely, and producing it under the kind of the hardest conditions, and my sympathies for your loss, and I can't imagine putting this all together and trying to keep momentum going for yourself and others during this time. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and open it up to some questions. Anyone have any questions? Go ahead and raise your virtual hand. I'll try to sequence them as I see them.
Yay!
Cynthia, go for it.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us and
Thank
for
you.
that wonderful story. Speaking as a fellow English teacher, we're capable of finding themes in pretty much everything because that's just what we do for a living. So I'm just curious to hear as these stories started to come in, as the collection started to come together, whether there were any particular recurring themes that sort of surprised you, that you weren't expecting, that began to bubble to the surface.
I pretty much, whenever I was trying to put this together in my head, I had a very specific theme that I wanted. And I wanted these stories to be hopeful. And I wanted them to be like, I wanted it to be like real life. Like I wanted happy stories, sad stories, funny stories, stories that were going to make you maybe a little bit angry, stories that were going to make you laugh. Like I wanted like a myriad of emotions and roller coasters, and for every, that's what so the story that kept coming back was identity, like who they were, who we were in every story, like even in Javi's poem, Javi's comics, it's like the stories it's about us, it's about who you are. And I think even if you weren't Mexican American, you can relate to these stories in some way, shape, or form. That it doesn't necessarily have to be. I wanted it to be, like I said, mirrors and windows to our culture. And I really feel that it was, as far as like the recurring theme of identity and seeing yourself. Yeah. But you're right. English teachers were good at that. We can find themes in anything. The purple curtain is purple because I loved it. I love teaching English.
Other folk, let's not be shy.
Hi, I actually have a quick question. So I'm kind of just curious, have you looked into much to see like which kind of audience this has made more of an impact on? Do you think it's made more of an impact on the like the Mexican American kind of audience that may have read through this book, or do you think it's impacted other kind of communities like more so or less so, or do you think it's just kind of a general, just very impactful book that you've written?
I hope it's generally impactful, but I know I've been doing a couple of things around the place, really mostly around Texas, that and I run into like students who tell me that they see them, like they're like Mexican American students who tell me they're very grateful and that they see themselves, and I get messages. I went to a book festival, and a librarian told me, she was an older woman, like, she said that she saw herself in the book, like, and was very grateful because she didn't have this book when she was little, and grateful that she had, like, this book was like for the little person inside her. And then I did a book festival on Zoom with a group in the UK, in London. Yeah, I was in the UK, and I was really excited because I'm a big Jane Austen fan. I love Mr. Darcy, and so the book festival was kind of like was set in like Jane Austen land. They were like in the same area. And she was telling me we're here in Jane Austen land. And I was like, I can't believe that I'm talking to people in Jane Austen land about a book about Mexican Americans, right? And the fact that she was like, oh, and the book is available. She was saying what bookstore they could get it at. And I was like, that's crazy to me that this book is across the pond in Jane Austen now with Mr. Darcy. Like that made me very happy. And so I'm hoping, the different things that I've done with other groups like around the country, it's been a mix of, and I really hope that that's what it is, but that it is a mix, that everybody can read this book and find something that they like in it and find something that they can relate to. That's my hope, but I really don't know. I wish I did. That's a good question. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Incredible that it, like you said, yeah, all the way across the pond. That is
It was
really
great.
something.
I see Nadine's hand. Go ahead, Nadine.
Hi, Margie.
Hi.
Buenas noches. I think it's night.
Yes, it is night.
I loved your book. I laughed, I cried, and I am Mexican, so Mexican, Puerto Rican, and I have familia in Texas. So I hear some of these similar stories, but even not living or growing up in Texas, you know, I've related to some of them, you know, with the quinceanera and just, you know, I just was reading every word and just hanging on because I just loved seeing myself there. And there's not a lot of books. I could look at my bookshelf right now and there's a handful, and I purposely go and get them, right? And so I'm really grateful for that. I was wondering, it's a little bit off topic, but as a librarian, are you seeing personally in your library or anybody like the book bans against books? I know you're in Texas, so that's probably very prominent. We've had some similar ones in our area, and I was just wondering how you would, if you would empower students to do something about it and what your thoughts are.
Here in Texas, it's really crazy. I was just at our library conference a couple of weeks ago, and we there was a line of people outside of the convention center that we were at protesting against transgender people because we were going to have they were going to have a speaker. Her name is Alyssa Edwards. She's a drag queen on RuPaul or something. She was one of the speakers that was going to be at TLA, and they were talking about how they do drag queen story hour. So we had a group of people. That was interesting. That's the first time I've ever been to a conference where have a people there boycott, like just protesting outside of like our place. And so we feel it here in Texas. I'm lucky that I work in a district that hasn't really, you know, said like, let's take these books off the shelves. I don't know what I would do because I'm very like, we had a meeting about it and I was like, you know, like if he wants to ban 800 books, we have like, there's a thing, we have policy and procedures, and you need to read all 800 books, and then you fill out the paperwork and we form a committee, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do. Like, who's going to do that? Like, is he going to do that? And I was just like going crazy, thinking like they were going to come after my books in my library. And I remember them asking like, well, who has what books? And this book in their pocket, they're like, Margie probably has all the books that they want to ban, because I probably do. And I had a lot of them, but because it's not because they're bad books. It's because these are the books our kids need to read. They're books about, and they were not crazy books. Like they're trying to say they're pornographic books. They were books about your period, books about you know, puberty, books about being transgendered, books, you know, about Black people, about just crazy reasons to ban books. And I was getting I get very heated. So our kids, we're lucky that they have it. We've had 2 books that were questioned here in my district. I've been a librarian for 10 years, and only one during my time, but one before. And it was a book because it was about a vampire. It was an old book called Silver Kiss, and somebody didn't like the word. There was a word in it. I think it said breast. There's nothing wrong with Silver Kiss. Silver Kiss was even before Twilight. So we don't have a lot of book bans. Like we don't have a lot of book, not bans, but a bunch of challenges. So I'm very lucky that we don't have that here in my district. I've heard that other districts have just been pulling books off shelves, and that they've been telling their librarians to do that. My district hasn't told us to do that. So I'm very grateful, because I don't know what I would do. I would really, because we can't, there's policies and procedures, and it's against really a lot of laws to go, it's, you know, to start pulling books off of our shelves, because nobody has the right. It's not my job. I don't have the right to tell anybody what they can read. Nobody has the right. My job is to make sure we have something in the library for everybody. And if you don't want to read it, you don't have to read it. Like nobody's telling you need to read this book or that book. Your child doesn't. If you don't want your child to read it, then we won't check out this book to your child. But you don't have the right to tell another child or my child what they can and can't read. And that's when it starts getting crazy because one person cannot be the voice of all the people, and then it's the wrong voice, you know. It's just been it's very concerning, and we've had a rough year. That I have library friends in other parts of Texas that have had a very hard time, and it's hard for, like, it's very, very hard for them.
Yeah, and you said something that struck a chord right now. You said one person can't be the voice of all the persons or all the people. And what your stories also talk about is that, you know, we as Mexican Americans are not a monolith, right? There was different types of experiences. I would have liked to see more rural because just that's a new experience to me, to be in a rural small town and be like the only Latina, and for people to assume like, oh, she has to speak Spanish, or the microaggressions. You know, I wanted to run for president of the United States, and the first question I get is, were you even born here? So like those ugly things that just kind of poke, and I did see them in there. I saw those microaggressions where if someone had blonde hair, blue eyes, they wouldn't be asking that, but because someone looks similar to me, they ask those questions. So I really like how you demonstrated them and like uplifted the characters or the people, where it was a positive thing. It wasn't like it got them down and they were just going to be like, oh, I guess I can't do that. So I really enjoyed that about that.
Thank you. Because I feel too that a lot of times whenever we read stories about minorities, it's always about the struggle. It's always, you know, and yes, we have struggle, but we also have joy and we have happiness and we live full lives, you know, a lot of you. So I wanted that represented in this book. I wanted it to show that we're just like everybody else. Like we really are. We live, we cry, everything. And so I was really happy with the stories that I was given for this book, because they were all, I just couldn't believe my luck. Every time a story would come in, I was like, wow, 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 wow. Like I was just so overwhelmed with the beauty of the writing from these people. Like, and then I have, like, it's a diverse group of writers. We've got some very seasoned writers, and then we have brand new writers. So it was just, I loved it. And in different ages, you know, different time eras, different parts of the country. That was also important. And just to keep the voices authentic. I know there was a couple of stories, because we had to have like a sensitivity reader, that they would read the story and they're like, well, this might offend somebody. And it's like, well, if it offends somebody, and I would have to think about it. Like, do I want to change it? And a lot of times, actually, I didn't change anything. I didn't want to, because every time I felt that they felt something was wrong, it was going to change the authenticity of the story. And I feel this book is very authentic. It sticks really to the Mexican culture. We didn't like whitewash it at all. Like we stuck to it, from words to, you know, there was a lot of you know, lingo. Like they're like, well, the language, somebody might not understand it. I said, well, they can learn. Like this is all a learning experience for everybody who doesn't understand, because that's what we need. We need them to see into our real world, not into the Hollywood world or whatever kind of other world that people make us out to be. So we kept the authenticity, and that was really important. And I was very grateful that they let me. Like they didn't fight. They were like, they let us keep the stories as is, and you know, just a couple things here and there, but we didn't have to change much. So I was very grateful to Penguin for that.
Other questions here? Cynthia again.
Yeah, I'll jump back in, sort of piggybacking on something you just said. I'm curious in your process whether you had to leave, you know, you got so many submissions that you had to leave a lot of things on the cutting room floor. Is there material out there for volume 2, or does this collection reflect a good majority of what you were able to get?
There was a couple of things we had to cut, only because they didn't fit the theme that I was going for, and we couldn't. We tried to fix it up and we couldn't, and that made me very sad, because I did ask a lot of people, and then to say like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't use your story. It was kind of, so I'm hoping maybe, yeah, that we could do a volume 2, or maybe something a little different than this. But because this one, I don't even know. Like sometimes I think about it and I'm like, how can I do it something else? Like, And people tell me, yes, you need to do another one. And it's just like, but how do I don't think I can ever top this one, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try. I have 2 more in mind, and I'm gonna try to live up to this one, I guess.
I'll ask a question while other people become brave enough to ask. Oh, Julia, you're next after me. So tell me about like what the translation process was like for the other book. Like it's very difficult to find any mainstream published books available both in English and Spanish that are about domestic Mexican Americans and not, written in Latin America, and then translated to the US. So like, did the authors translate for themselves? Did someone else do the translation? And then how do you deal with language? Because I read the English one, I'll confess. And then I'm accustomed to reading Spanglish, and so I enjoyed the blended language. Is this one also have English? Or is it purely in Spanish? Like, how did you decide how to treat language in the Spanish version, the translation?
Well, they asked me, they're like, do you want to do the translations? And I was like, I love that you think that I could do the translations, but I couldn't do the translations. There's no way. I grew up in a traditional American school, and I speak Tex-Mex. It's even worse than Spanglish. It's like border Spanish is kind of, there's no way I could have done this, but they translated it for us, and I read it, and I was really excited to be able to give it to like my friend's parents who only speak Spanish. I have a real good friend from high school, and his dad only speaks Spanish, and his dad was really excited about the book coming out, right? So when it came out in Spanish, I was like, JJ, I can give a book to your dad. Like, I was so excited because I was able to. And then I have another friend whose mom only speaks Spanish, and so that made me real happy that I was able to share it that we're going to be able to share it with people who speak Spanish, but or who can only read Spanish. But I wasn't able to do it. It's also in audiobook. That was exciting. So they asked me to read the beginning, like the part that I wrote, the Dear Reader introduction. They let me read that as the audiobook. So when you listen to the audiobook, it's my squeaky voice in the very first thing. And I was saying, I hope people don't return it after they hear my voice, thinking it's gonna be me the whole time. But no, we have some really wonderful 2 narrators, a boy and a girl, a man and a woman, who narrate this book, and they're wonderful voice actors. So that was exciting. I've been listening to it like on the way home, back to work, and on the way back home, and I love it. Like, it's so crazy to me because I used audiobooks a lot in class too. Sometimes, like when we would read long books, like I read Twilight. I was crazy. Actually, I love Twilight, and I read Twilight with my kids, and sometimes the kids didn't want to read out loud, and I never really liked to have kids read out loud because some kids can't read fluently, because sometimes I can't read fluently, so I never made my kids do that. So whenever we would read it, I would play the audiobook. So I used the audiobooks a lot, so I was excited that it was going to have an audiobook. But as far as the translations, I didn't do them. I wish I could say that I did, but I did do Spanish press. That was fun. Whenever it came out in January, I was able to talk to different groups in the Spanish media and Spanish. I just did a podcast with somebody a couple weeks ago, and that was fun. It's been really cool, I think, to have them both. And you're right. I was really excited when I didn't even ask. They just said we're going to do it in English and Spanish, and I was like, wow, that's awesome.
Totally. Okay, so I see some hands. I'm gonna let Julia go and then Ricky after.
Well, you kind of stole my question, so I changed it a little bit. I was wondering, going back to kind of your story, choosing your story, that whole process, did you give like your authors a theme, or were you like seeking out certain authors? Because I know you said you had to cut a couple that weren't in the theme. So like, how did that process go?
I did seek out people that I knew. Like, I'm very proud to say there's 7, hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 writers from the Rio Grande Valley in this book, from where I live, from my area. Like, so I was real proud that I can say that I had my area very well represented, the Valley, but I wanted it also to be representative of the whole country. Like, I didn't want just, like I said, we don't just exist in the border, but we exist all over the country. So I looked for writers, different Mexican American writers from all over the country that I had met along the way, like I've been a librarian for a while. So these are people that I've known for years. And I was lucky that they said, yes, we'll work with you, because, really what I asked them was, whenever you do an anthology, you pay all the writers out, right? But the publisher pays you money, and then you pay them. You're really asking them, will you give me your heart and soul so I can put in here, and I'm going to give you a little bit of money for it, because that's pretty much how it works. So, but they were so awesome. Like everybody that I asked said yes. And the thing is, the Mexican American writing community is very small. We're not a big community, and I wish we were. Like, we need to be bigger, and that's why stuff like this is important, because we're not as big as, we're the biggest minority group in the country, and we're like probably the smallest writing community in publishing. So it's not right. So as I'm looking for other authors, because I kind of wanted to, I have this one, and I was thinking of doing a couple of other. I'm working on a couple of other anthologies, and I was seeking out other writers, and it's a little bit difficult because we're not a lot of people. As much as you think like, oh, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ask. It's difficult to try to find specific. And then what I want, like I wanted stories that were gonna capture kind of more like geared towards a young adult. And although anybody can read this book is for everybody. But I really wanted to make sure it hit the young adult group, because that's who I serve. I serve young adults in the schools, and I wanted it for English classes, like I said. And so the themes had to be, there's certain, we couldn't do certain things, and we had to stay within certain, and we kind of pushed the button, bullet, whatever, with a couple of these stories, but we were able to keep it, like in the young adult genre. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that did.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Do I just go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Ricky.
Okay. So I know you mentioned that you speak mainly Tex-Mex. So when you were receiving stories and from your authors, did you ask them, or, I know a lot of times translations kind of goof things up between, language to language. So when you were getting stories from different people, did you find that the translation to English, if it was from a Spanish source, lost some emotion? Or I don't know if you read the Spanish version of your own book.
I've read some of it, because I've read most of it, but I don't feel, because Spanish to me, the Spanish that the book is translated in is so much more beautiful than the Spanish I speak. I speak a very, I grew up, like I said, in a border town, and my Spanish isn't, I don't speak fluent, beautiful Spanish like the way my mom does or my dad does and my grandparents did. My Spanish is more conversational and watched up. Like sometimes I need to work on my Spanish. But when I was reading it, I felt like the book was written. I felt it was so much more beautiful than the Spanish that I know. So I felt it translated well. I was really happy with the translations. And David Bowles is a translator. He's one of the writers in the book, and I'm going to see him next week, and I'm going to ask him how he thinks that the translation, like how it went, because I'm curious to know what somebody like him, who speaks both languages well and translates, and maybe we should have asked him to translate, but they asked, I don't know who, I guess whoever that does it through, I think it's Penguin Espanol or Vintage Espanol, somebody Espanol, but it's part of Penguin. So they translated it, and I think it came out okay. Do you think it came out okay?
Just judging. So when there are portions that you don't, like you said, you don't whitewash it. You don't turn it into English. You just try, if people want to go out there and find out what it means, they'll go find out what it means.
Right.
Those I felt had a little more emotion than a lot of the things that just in my head, just coming from Mexican parents that don't really speak, English. I'm always thinking of, the words in Spanish, even though I hear them in English or read them in English. so as I was reading along, I could, imagine how it would be translated to English, or even that section before, how it would have been said in Spanish if it were all in Spanish.
Mhm.
So I thought those portions were nicely done in Spanish. That's why I was just curious. I haven't had a
Oh,
chance to look at your
I'm
Spanish
glad to
version.
hear that. I'm really glad to hear that because, like I said, I thought it was beautiful. I was like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. But what do I know? But thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Other questions here? Maybe
not
we can, okay.
Oh, sorry. I don't really know how to use the hand raising thing. So, but a question I've been coming back to was when I was reading them, whether or not the stories have came from the writer's original experiences or just from, general truths that they have felt. I felt so much like this, like, did this happen to them? And how, like a story that I keep on coming back to is the story of the little girl.
My name is
Who-
Dolores.
Yes, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I really hope this didn't happen to this writer. I guess I was just thinking about, did writers, when they did send you these stories, did they tell you whether or not this was like creative writing or whether it was their own?
Yes, they did. I know the origin of every story. That story, My Name is Dolores, the one, or her name is Guadalupe Ruiz Flores. Yeah, that is a true story. It's based on her as a little girl. But that was the first story that I got. Like whenever I asked for submissions, and I asked Guadalupe for one, Lupita for one, and she sent me that story. She was the first person to send her story, and I read that story and I cried because that was my mother too. My mother was a migrant farm worker who would, go away and then come back, and then they would throw them in these classrooms with a kid that was supposed to teach them. They didn't speak English. If they spoke Spanish, they would hit them. I mean, just terrible. And that's partly another reason why I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker, because my mother taught herself English. My mother's the only one of her brothers and sisters that went to college and has a college degree, which is why she pushed education on us. But like her and my dad didn't teach us Spanish because when they were little, Spanish was bad. So, and then now fast forward to our age now, and we wish we would have learned Spanish. We understand it. Like I could always understand when my aunts were gossiping because we had to we needed to understand to know what was going on. So I can understand Spanish. I just don't speak. I'm not very confident with it because I don't speak it as well as like they do. But that's why they didn't teach us Spanish, because they didn't want us to get hit at school, because it was they couldn't speak Spanish at school. So that story was a real it hit me hard because that was my mother. That was so many people, like so many young girls and boys here and all over the country who spoke Spanish and were like that, what that happened to. But yes, that was a true story. That was a true story for Lupe. Another true story was David Bull's story, the body by the canal. Him and his brother actually did find a body in a canal when they were back in the 80s. It was right at the height of the AIDS epidemic when it first started. They found the body of a teacher who had AIDS. Somebody killed the teacher and threw them in the canal, and David's brother found him. So that story is kind of autobiographical as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Was it a stylistic choice, or was it like the author's own, like they just didn't want to share whether that was true? Like, was there ever the discussion of like, do we put this is a true story or not? Do you think that would add more of an impact behind it, or do you think that's kind of like
Maybe it would have, because a lot of people ask me like if they were true stories, and I'll say like, well, I know that Lupita's was, I know David's was, I know Trini's essay's true, and Alex's essay's true. Justine's poem is kind of a little bit autobiographical too. So, and even Dr. Saldana's poem as a child, like that. A lot of these stories are they come from somewhere inside of these writers because of the way Mexican Americans have been treated throughout their lives and the lives of these, Eunice E. Tarleton Trujillo, she grew up in a very conservative, white town. And, and she was a gay girl, a gay young woman. And that was also, it comes out in her story, like how hard it was to grow up young and queer in a Texas town that was very, very conservative. And so a lot of these stories are, and I guess maybe we should have put that, but
I also like that it's not put there, just because it allows all of the stories to have a punch.
yeah.
And also just because it might not have happened to, Alex, right? Or, it happens to someone.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a collective truth. So thank you. That was like an important, I don't know, something that I was wondering. So thank you for answering.
Claudia, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Charis, and thank you for being here, Margie. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. So I want to make sure that I get this straight. I haven't had the opportunity to read the book, but it sounds like something I would enjoy reading. Was the book written in English and then translated to Spanish? Okay. And were the stories mostly within, from people, their experiences over what period of time? The last 10 years, the last, couple of decades, or older people?
I have the story was English translated to Spanish, and the ages of my authors range from like 50, maybe even in their 60s. Maybe I have one. I'm trying to think of how old Francisco is. He's he's an attorney in Boston or in Massachusetts. He grew up here in El Paso, or no, Eagle Pass. And he's probably the oldest writer in the book. And I wanted to make sure that and then there's also like David's story that's kind of set in a certain time. And I wanted different, I don't know if and Trini's story happened about maybe 20 years ago whenever he was studying in the Smithsonian. So there's just different, I didn't necessarily ask for different, I wanted real experiences for the book by my writers. And I picked writers of different ages and different parts of the country. That way that would be represented in the book, that it would be like a really diverse collection of stories. And it really is.
Have the authors, did they come together at any point? Like is everyone still in contact? Are you still in contact with them?
Yes, I am still in contact with them. I love them all very much. Dominic Carrillo is probably the one that's the furthest away. He's in Bolivia. That's where he lives. His wife is over there. His wife's from over there. And he's over there, he teaches over there. And he's been over there for a long time. He's from California. So he's probably the only one that's not here in the States. But we've had different, I've been able to get them on different Zoom things together, like for us to, and then here, like all my Valley people, I call them my 956 crew. Every time I have an event here, like if somebody calls me to go, like, come talk at the library or whatever, I'll invite all of them to come too. And we all go. And next week, the English 2 kids in my high school are reading the book. So next week on Tuesday, all the people that are in the book that are from the Valley that live here still, there's 5 of them. They're going to meet me at my high school, and we're going to talk to all of the kids about the different stories. So I'm really excited about that. So I was able to do some, we did Texas Book Festival, a group of us together. So different festivals and different things have had us do things together. I haven't been able to do one with all 20 of us. I'm hoping, or 19 of us, well, 20 with me. So I'm hoping one day I'll be able to get all 20 of us together. That would be amazing. And then Dominic from way over there, wherever he is. But yeah.
That would be really neat. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was kind of just wondering, and I might have missed this part if you already mentioned it, but I noticed that you mentioned that you had some difficulties and things getting the book published and getting it kind of all set up. But I was kind of wondering more about connecting with people to get the stories. Did you ever face any problems with you would get connected with someone and say, hey, I've heard that, you have a powerful story, like I'd like to write about it. And did you run into a lot of people that said, no, I don't want to talk about it, or I don't want to write, I don't want you to put it in a book, or things like that?
No, everybody that I asked to, I told them what I was doing, the whole like motive behind it and the project that I wanted to work on. Everybody was like, I'm in. And I just told them the kind of like a theme that I wanted for the age group that I wanted, and they sent me stories. There were some that I did get that I just couldn't use because they didn't really go with the theme that I was looking for, or I just didn't feel the story fit this book. So I kind of had to cut some. And I asked like 30 people and I ended up with 19 people, but I have 20 stories because in my head I wanted 20 stories. And I was like frantic looking for somebody else, and my editor at Penguin was like, it's okay, we can do 9. I was like, no, I need 20 stories. So I asked Javier Garza, he's the one who did the comics. And I was like, will you do one more comic? So he did another comic so I could put in there so I could have 20 stories, because in my head I needed 20 stories. So I didn't really run, there was nobody was really ugly. Everybody was really, really great. And even the people that I had to like say that I couldn't use their story, that maybe we could use it another time, were really, really great. So it was all a very beautiful experience trying to get this together.
Okay, cool. That's good to hear.
Yes.
Other questions? So it sounds like it's your fault that I'm haunted by the comic La Lorana. Like that is every child's nighttime though, right?
It is. Every child's nightmare.
It may not be her, but it's something else. And you're just like, I'm not thinking about it, but I'm thinking about it, right? That, yeah. And just for pains, it's amazing how much story gets conveyed. And I think that's true in so many of the stories. You drop into someone's life and immediately you kind of have a sense of the characters, and they take you on this little short journey, and just the condensed amount of like storytelling in their pages is really kind of impressive.
Yes, it, even whenever I'm listening to it in the car with on the audio, it's just like these stories, they're not very long, which is really wonderful for reluctant readers. I mean, I just think anthologies are the best for a lot of things. And just like from my ride from home to school, you can hear a whole story and I'm like, wow, that was such a great story. So yeah, thank you.
Other
have
questions
another
here? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I don't mean
Bye,
to be
Colleen.
interrupting. I just can't figure out the raising hand thing. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so with getting to the 20 stories, was there ever a time where you were thinking about including a story of your own?
When I was doing this, it was never about me. Like it was always about, I wanted a collection, right? And so I was thinking like, and at the end of it all, Lupita was the one who helped me. She kind of like, if it wasn't for Lupita, this book wouldn't be here. If she wouldn't have mentioned it to her agent, if her agent wouldn't have said, let me talk to her, and called me and signed me, like it was all a very surreal experience. So as I was trying to get all of these things together, and at the end, they wanted me to write the introduction, so I wrote that, and Lupita was like, we need a story from you. And I was like, I just didn't feel, I guess, confident enough. I don't know. Just wasn't ready for it. And I thought about it, like it was already too late. I was like, no, I can't do it now. I don't want to do it now. Like it kind of freaked me out. So I'm thinking maybe one day I'll put a story somewhere. But it was like I said, I didn't think about doing it because for me to put a story in there. I was just thinking about all the other beautiful voices that I could put in there. And Lupita was like, you need to do one too. And I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe next time. But yeah, just the beginning was all that what I did.
The beginning, I really liked how it put into context. You talked about Trump's presidency, right? And it put into context like the like within what, you know, like why this book was needed, right? I was thinking about like activism. Has there, I don't know if this is like too much, but like, has anyone ever sent this book to a politician that might have not super friendly policies? Or I don't know if that makes sense,
You
but
know, I haven't had any bad stuff happen. Like nobody has come at me with trying to, you know, to, but I did have one person, I'm lying. I was at a little thing in my hometown that they had, and one guy was really upset because I offended him by calling him Mexican. And I'm like, sir, I'm not even talking to you. Like, I'm not even here talking to you. Calm down. And I told him that's not a political book. Like, if you're a Mexican American, then you shouldn't be attacking me like this. Like, this book, it's not a political book. And you haven't read it because you haven't read it. And he just wanted to attack me. He's the only, and then there was also a couple of, I went to speak at a school a couple of weeks ago, and the librarian there told me that there was one English teacher that said that she wasn't going to come hear me speak because she didn't agree with immigration. And I was like, okay. And I was like, I hope she comes. I hope she comes. But no, she didn't come because she didn't agree with immigration. But I'm thinking, like, this has nothing to do with immigration. I go, so obviously she didn't read the book, has no idea what it's about, because there's nothing, like, it's, people just take it. But I haven't had anything like big or crazy or a politician or anything come at me. I hope I don't. Well, it might be good for book sales. I don't know, maybe.
You're not afraid. I appreciate that. Any other questions here? Do you know if any of the stories are part of larger projects? Because many of them feel so lived in, like I want to know more. Like,
You know, there, let me see who, I know that we had like Francisco Stork, he had given me a story, and then he called me later and he was like, I'm going to use that story or a character of the story in a book that he just sold. And they were kind of like, they didn't want, he wanted to know like if I still wanted the story. And I was like, sure, because the first story that he gave me was beautiful. I was like, oh, I don't care. And then over here on the other side, they were like, no, we want a story. Ask him if we can have just like a story that's just going to be ours. So I went back and I asked him, and he was like, I felt real like, how do I go and ask Francisco Stork for a Bell Prix winner? Like this amazing, like, I need another story, dude. Like, just give me, like, it was just so, he was so, he's the most wonderful, beautiful man. He's a great person. And he wrote me another story, and he was like, that's fine. I'll give you another story. So he like ripped it up, and he titled it Margie's Story and gave it to me that nobody else would have it. So basically what I know is that a lot of these stories, we wanted them to be just like for us, but I think there's a couple. I think David might go into a bigger story later. Who else? I think he's the only one that we wrote into a, maybe Diana? No, I think it's just David, but they're pretty much, the stories are going to stay pretty much. Oh, and Ruben might use a story, like something of the story, the quinceañera story, but everything else was pretty much exclusive to this anthology.
yeah, to say the Quince story as an educator, like the way that school like hug their people, it was amazing.
You know, it's a true story.
Oh, is
It
it? Like, where's that school? Because I want to go there. I want to learn.
It's in San Benito High School here in the Rio Grande Valley. It's a true, that's a true story. Yeah.
Other questions here? Our time is
I
growing
do.
short.
I
Oh yeah,
do.
go.
Well, I wanted to say thank you so much for having the time to put together this wonderful book as an editor. And I read, like, the book just reads so well. And last week we had a discussion at our school, at Walla Walla University, and we have like different kinds of students, you know, and then they were voicing their opinion saying that, yeah, the stories were about Mexican Americans, but like you mentioned earlier, that those stories could be related to anybody, anybody, because like once you were a teenager, or once you had a teacher, like I remember growing up in the 1980s in Los Angeles. And yeah, I lost one of my, I think it was 7th or 8th grade, one of my English teachers to AIDS, but like you wouldn't talk about that. And then when I went to high school in the 1990s, another one, and that one, like towards the end, another teacher said, yeah, he died from that. But it's just these stories that people could connect. And like you mentioned earlier, like yes, there were some funny stories. I laughed, but there were some like heart-wrenching stories that like, oh my goodness, like how, like I find myself like crying, like I'm like, oh, I can't believe like this, because a lot of the topics, they're real topics that I might never encounter them, but I feel sympathetic towards that. I feel empathy towards that, because that's a reality. Like Milady, you know, the quinceañera one, but it's like all these other things happening in her life. But and it's just like, and yeah, like Sherry said, like I want to go to that school, like what is that happening? So it's just a sense of community that you have in there. And also I like the one of the stories, I like a lot of the stories, some of them more than others, but it was like the one where the one where she's telling different stories, and then like she tells, well, my dad went into the army, and then like when he was over there he had some friends, but then there were other ones who were like bullying him, and they said, and they call him like wetback. And then so when you were talking about your book being read like in England, say, okay, so your book read as a mojado, like, you know, you cross the border, like the ocean. But it was really interesting to see that because like even in that story, like there's some kind of a message about like people don't know the history of Mexicans, Native Americans, like because of colonialism, like I'm not Mexican, but I'm Salvadoran, but we have like all this indigenous blood, all this other blood, and what is the United States, like Gloria Anzaldúa, the beloved Texan writer, said like this land was native once, will be native all again, and it's always native. So it's just like the idea, the connection. So it's really interesting. And then the students were able to connect, being able to see names and stories that they thought like, oh, but there are real people out there, like we might same experience, maybe like 10 decades ago, I don't know, like, you know, years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. Yeah, but thank you so much.
And Gloria Anzaldúa, I love to tell everybody, went to my high school. She graduated from Edinburgh High School like I did. So that's, I always like, I love to say that. But, you know, the border literature, you know, started here, like here in our area with Gloria Anzaldúa.
Completely. It's good bragging rights, right?
Oh yes, she was a valedictorian of Edinburgh High School.
Awesome. You had a strong English department then, right? To produce those writers. Yeah. Other questions here? Any final ones as we wrap up? Well, Margie, I want to thank you so much for your time, for the time that you put into producing this excellent book, and also the time that you devoted to spend with us tonight. Really appreciate it. We enjoyed your book as a community, reading it, talking about it, and now being able to speak to you is really an important, I think, conclusion to this learning experience we had as a community.
Thank you. I had a great time. Like I said, I love to talk. I could talk forever. So thank you.
Yeah, so like in one of those next anthologies, though, there are lots of Mexican Americans in the Pacific Northwest too. You know, I think that their stories would be, I think our students and our folk here would love to see themselves represented in future anthologies. And so I don't know who to suggest as a writer, but keep us in mind up in this corner of the US.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
you.
Bye.